Tonight, we begin our journey into the vast, beautifully complex world of the ancient Greek gods. A pantheon so deeply powerful, so grand in its cosmic scale, yet remarkably human in its quiet tragedies and unpredictable emotions. Before you settle completely into the stillness of the evening, take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely find comfort in the stories we share here. And please, let me know in the comments where in the world you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always a comforting thought to know exactly who is resting alongside us, sharing these quiet, nocturnal hours across the globe. Now, I invite you to dim the lights around you. Perhaps turn on a fan, allowing its soft, steady hum to fill the background of your space. Let your breathing slow down to a peaceful rhythm. Let the heavy weight of the day drift completely away, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. We will start at the very summit of creation, with the sovereign of the skies himself, high above the shifting clouds and the fleeting concerns of the mortal realm, resting in the eternal quiet of the upper atmosphere, far beyond the reach of the highest flying birds, past the cold, whistling winds that carve the mountain stone, and steeped in an ancient golden light, stood the majestic peaks of Mount Olympus. Here, in the absolute stillness of the heavens, we find the sovereign of the skies, Zeus. To truly understand him is to understand the slow, rolling thunder that echoes across vast, empty plains, a force both profoundly beautiful and deeply indifferent to what it touches. The ancient records tell us that the universe was not always ruled by this radiant king. Before the age of Olympus, the cosmos was heavy with the reign of the Titans, governed by his predecessor Cronus. But eras in mythology shift like the turning of massive celestial gears, slow and inevitable. The ascent of Zeus did not come through the gruesome details mortal men often paint in their histories, but rather through a grand cosmic transition. The old Titan fell into the shadow of time, fading gently into the forgotten echoes of the earth, allowing a new dawn of divine order to break across the heavens. With the old age past, Zeus took his place upon the highest throne. He was given dominion over the boundless skies, acting as the gatherer of clouds, the bringer of rain, and the keeper of oaths. He became the living embodiment of cosmic justice, a sovereign whose mere nod could shake the foundations of the world. Yet, for all his immense responsibility, Zeus was a ruler who demonstrated that absolute, unchecked dominion often blurs the lines between divine duty and personal desire. He was a being of pure, restless energy, forever looking downward through the parting mist, drawn inexorably toward the fragile, fleeting lives of the mortals below. His gaze was wandering, his presence uncontainable, filling the space between the heavens and the earth with an overwhelming, almost suffocating gravity that demanded both awe and fearful reverence from all who lived beneath his vast domain. The mythologies speak of a king who could not remain still, a deity who found the absolute quiet of his throne room to be a heavy burden. While his crown demanded solemnity, his nature demanded experience. He was a great storm trapped within perfect marble halls. The stories gently veil his countless earthly pursuits, describing them not as mortal failings, but as the inevitable cascading reach of the sky touching the earth. He would often leave the quiet isolation of the heavens, adopting shapes that mirrored the natural world around him. Sometimes he descended as a majestic, silent swan gliding effortlessly across a mirrored lake, or as a magnificent bull with a coat as pale and soft as the moon. Other times, he arrived simply as a shimmering veil of golden mist, drifting gently through the open windows of lonely palaces in the dead of night. These transformations were the acts of a deity unbound by the rigid laws of nature, a force whose endless fascinations wove complicated, sprawling tapestries of demigods, wandering heroes, and forgotten royal lineages. But it would be a fundamental mistake to view the sovereign only through the lens of his restless wandering. When the skies darkened and the golden mist retreated to the peaks, Zeus stood firmly as the ultimate arbiter of the ancient world. He was the great referee of the cosmos, He listened to the quiet, desperate prayers of weary travelers. He upheld the sacred laws of hospitality, and he ensured that oaths sworn in the stillness of the night were eternally honored. When mortals grew too proud, believing themselves equal to the eternal forces of nature, it was Zeus who sent the distant rumbling warning of thunder. He demanded respect, not merely for his own vanity, but because without his heavy balancing hand, the delicate architecture of existence would simply collapse into endless chaos. He was the ultimate divine contradiction, an entity of boundless, untethered freedom, who simultaneously carried the immeasurable weight of universal order upon his broad, unmoving shoulders. Sitting quietly beside this storm of a king was the undisputed queen of the gods, the goddess Hera. She was a figure of absolute, unyielding majesty. If Zeus was the restless, wandering sky, Hera was the heavy, ornate marble of the temple floor, solid, enduring, and deeply unmoving in her principles. She was the patron goddess of marriage, of the family, and of the sacred, quiet bonds that hold mortal communities together. There is a profound, almost tragic irony woven deeply into the ancient texts regarding her specific domain. She was the ultimate symbol of unity and domestic tranquility, yet her own union was a tempestuous, centuries-long saga of quiet endurance and deliberate balance. Their sacred marriage was supposed to serve as the divine ideal, the perfect, unblemished mirror for mortal men and women to look up to as they built their own lives. Instead, it became an intricate, slow-moving play of celestial tension. Hera was not a queen who ruled from the background, nor did she simply accept the fading of her light. Her presence on Mount Olympus was just as imposing as that of her husband, if not more so in its sheer, deliberate stillness. She wore her crown with a heavy, dignified grace, projecting an aura of power that commanded immediate, silent respect from every deity who crossed the gilded halls. While Zeus projected his power outward, scattering it across the winds and the mortal lands below, Hera's power was intensely focused, tightly coiled like a spring of pure, cold silver. She represented the absolute dignity of the divine structure, standing impossibly tall even when the foundations of her own palace felt entirely unsteady. Her temples scattered across the ancient world, from the quiet, sun-baked plains of Argos to the distant shores of Samos, were massive structures of white stone, built by followers who sought her steady, unwavering protection against the unpredictable storms of life. To truly understand the Queen of the Heavens is to understand the nature of a slowly moving glacier, something beautiful, quiet, and absolutely devastating to anything that stands in its inevitable path. Her immense power often manifested in one very specific, deliberate way, a calm, calculated retribution. She did not raise her voice in the grand halls, nor did she hurl lightning or shatter mountains in sudden fits of rage like her husband. Her response to the sovereign's endless wanderings was far more methodical, a slow tightening of the cosmic scales. The ancient storytellers wrapped her actions in myths of gentle transformations and eternal slumbers. Those who found themselves caught in the wandering gaze of the king soon learned the terrifying weight of the queen's displeasure. According to the old testimonies, she turned rivals into wandering creatures of the field, bound them to the earth as weeping trees, or cursed them to wander the world as echoing voices, fading slowly into the ambient background of the deep forests. It is easy for modern minds to view these actions simply as mortal jealousy, but to the ancient world, she was maintaining a necessary, albeit harsh, equilibrium. She was holding the chaotic, sprawling family of Olympus together through sheer unbending will and a decorative, chilling majesty that demanded absolute reverence. Therapy and reconciliation were not concepts that existed in the ancient days of Greece. Instead, there was only consequence, and Hera was the living embodiment of that consequence. She was the grand protector of vows, the silent watcher in the night, the deity to whom women whispered their deepest fears and most fervent hopes when the world grew dark. Her story is not merely one of resentment, but of a queen who bore the impossible burden of symbolizing perfect unity in a world governed by beautiful, chaotic flaws. She ruled her domain with a steady, unflinching hand, ensuring that no matter how far the sky wandered, the throne of the heavens remained firmly anchored in tradition and power. Yet, while the king and queen commanded the highest sunlit peaks of the heavens, the vast and untamed boundaries of the world were ruled by brothers who preferred the deep currents of the sea and the quiet shadows of the earth. When the world was divided among the three great brothers, the sovereign of the skies took the boundless heights, leaving the heavy, fathomless depths of the earth to his kin. To descend from the sunlit peaks of Olympus is to eventually meet the vast, rolling expanse of the sea. Here, beneath shifting tides and the deep green shadows of the ocean floor, ruled Poseidon. He was the god of the deep, a deity whose very essence mirrored the immense breathing rhythm of the ocean itself. Listen, in your mind, to the slow, methodical drawing back of the water against a pebbled shore, followed by the heavy, resonant crash of the wave returning to the earth. This steady, eternal heartbeat of the sea was the pulse of Poseidon. He commanded the vast oceans, the deep underwater trenches, and the ancient creatures that glided silently through the dark, cold waters far below the reach of mortal sight. He carried a heavy, three-pronged trident, an instrument of profound elemental power, capable of stirring the quiet waters into a towering swell or calming a restless tide into a sheet of perfectly smooth, mirrored glass. To the mortals who built their lives along the rocky coastlines, Poseidon was an ever-present, looming reality. Fishermen casting their nets into the pre-dawn mist, sailors navigating the endless horizon by the faint light of distant stars, and city builders laying stones near the water's edge, all paid profound, silent respect to the Lord of the Sea. They understood that the ocean was a generous but deeply unpredictable force. In his tranquil moments, Poseidon was the great provider, offering smooth, effortless sailing, abundant harvests from the deep, and the gentle, cooling breezes that swept across the sun-baked shores. The waters would lap gently against the wooden hulls of ancient ships, a soothing, rhythmic lullaby that carried travelers safely to their distant destinations. But the sea is never entirely at rest. Just beneath the shimmering, sunlit surface lay a heavy, brooding temperament. When the ancient texts speak of his anger, they do not describe petty squabbles, but rather the slow, terrifying retreat of the tide before a massive, inescapable surge. He was the embodiment of the earth's hidden tensions, capable of shaking the very foundations of the land, reminding mortals that the solid ground they walked upon was merely a fragile island floating within his eternal watery domain. The mythology surrounding the Lord of the Depths often intertwines with the untamed forces of nature. He was inextricably linked to the slow creation of islands, the carving of deep coastal caverns, and the sudden massive shifts of tectonic plates. The ancient Greeks also revered him as the creator and tamer of horses, creatures whose powerful thundering hooves against the plains mirrored the relentless crashing force of waves breaking against a cliffside. His presence was not one of malice, but of raw, untempered nature, asserting its absolute dominance. He was the dark, heavy storm clouds gathering silently on the edge of the horizon, the sudden drop in atmospheric pressure before a midnight gale, and the thick, salty mist that clings to the skin long after the storm has finally passed. Mortals knew that to venture onto the open sea was to enter his sovereign territory, a place where human laws and mortal reasoning held absolutely no power. You could only ask for his favor, leaving quiet offerings on the wet sand and trusting in the deep, indifferent currents of the ocean to guide you safely back home. He was the ultimate restless force of the natural world, a deity of immense weight and deep, resounding echoes. Yet, if Poseidon represented the relentless waking movement of the world, there was another brother who governed the absolute, final stillness. Far beneath the crashing waves, deeper still than the roots of the oldest mountains, lay a realm entirely untouched by the warmth of the sun or the shifting of the tides. This was the underworld, and it was ruled by the eldest of the three brothers, Hades. For centuries, later mythologies and mortal misunderstandings have painted him as a figure of malice, a cruel architect of suffering. But the ancient true essence of Hades was something entirely different. He was not evil, nor was he cruel. He was simply the solemn and infinitely patient guardian of the final rest. When the cosmos was divided, Hades drew the shadows, accepting the heavy, silent burden of managing the vast, quiet eternity where all mortal souls eventually journeyed when their exhausting time in the waking world came to a gentle, inevitable close. Imagine a landscape bathed in perpetual, soft twilight. There are no howling winds here, no blinding sunlight to strain the eyes, and no crashing waves to disrupt the peace. There is only a cool, enveloping mist that rolls silently across vast fields of pale, luminous asphodel flowers. The air is entirely still, carrying the faint, sweet scent of damp earth and ancient memory. This is the true realm of Hades. It is a place of absolute quiet, a vast, echoing sanctuary where the heavy physical burdens of mortal life are finally set down upon the ground. The souls who wander here do not suffer. They simply drift, light as feathers falling through a windless sky, free from the pains, the hungers, and the ceaseless desires of the world above. Hades sits upon his dark throne of ebony and obsidian, observing this silent expanse with a calm, brooding authority. He does not demand worship, nor does he ever seek to expand his borders. He knows with the infinite patience of the deep earth itself that everything eventually comes to him. He is the ultimate quiet certainty at the end of all long journeys. Unlike his brothers who reveled in the bright chaotic affairs of Olympus, Hades rarely left his twilight kingdom. He found no joy in the grand celestial celebrations, nor did he possess any desire to interfere with the tangled lives of mortals. He was entirely devoted to his solemn duty, a tireless custodian of balance, ensuring that the delicate boundaries between the living and the resting remained perfectly intact. The gates to his hidden realm were guarded not by instruments of cruelty, but by solemn, majestic sentinels. The great multi-headed hounds who watched the borders possessed a silent, unblinking loyalty, ensuring that the absolute peace of the realm was never disturbed by the chaotic, restless energies of the waking world. The architecture of his kingdom was vast and meticulously ordered, providing a sacred space for every kind of soul. From the tranquil, sunless glades reserved for those who lived with virtue, to the deeper, heavier shadows meant for contemplation and quiet reflection, Hades oversaw it all with an unchanging demeanor. He was the quiet, immovable anchor of the universe, the unmoving center around which all mortal lives eventually, and inevitably, circled. Beside him in this quiet eternity sat his queen, Persephone, the bringer of seasonal balance and grace. Their union, though born of ancient fateful complexities, blossomed into a profound and entirely stable harmony. She brought the faint memory of spring down into the cool shadows, while he offered her a throne of absolute reverence and quiet, undivided devotion. Together, they ruled the silent kingdom not with terror, but with an enduring solemnity. Mortals above ground rarely spoke the true name of the Lord of the Shadows. They did not build him towering temples in the bustling centers of their cities, nor did they sing loud, joyous hymns in his honor. Instead, they offered their respect through lowered voices, deliberate pauses, and quiet libations poured directly into the rich, dark soil. They respectfully called him the Wealthy One, acknowledging that all the precious treasures of the earth, the dormant seeds, the buried gems, the veins of gold, and the resting souls, belonged solely to him. He was the quiet uncle of the pantheon, a deity revered from a safe, polite distance, holding the keys to the most inevitable, peaceful mystery of existence. He demanded that when the final sleep arrived, it was respected without question. While the brothers governed the boundless oceans and the silent afterlife, the architecture of the mortal world above was being shaped by two opposing forces, one of calculated wisdom and the other of unbridled chaos. While the brothers governed the boundless oceans and the silent afterlife, the architecture of the mortal world above was being shaped by two opposing forces, one of calculated wisdom and the other of unbridled chaos. To understand the delicate balance of civilization, one must look toward the gleaming, sunlit heights of the heavens, where the goddess Athena stood as the ultimate embodiment of pure, unclouded logic. She was the deity of profound strategy, of careful architectural planning, of quiet reflection, and of the disciplined mind. If the universe was a vast, sprawling tapestry of entirely unpredictable elements, Athena was the careful, steady hand guiding the loom, weaving absolute order out of overwhelming confusion. She did not operate in the realm of sudden emotional outbursts, nor did she allow fleeting passions to cloud her crystalline vision. Instead, she existed in a state of continuous, razor-sharp awareness, her thoughts moving with the deliberate precision of a perfectly calibrated astronomical instrument. She was the quiet, steadying force that allowed humanity to build great, enduring cities of marble, teaching them to measure the stars, to chart the changing seasons, and to navigate the immense complexities of earthly existence without succumbing to their chaotic instincts. Her very emergence into the cosmos was an event of profound symbolic significance. The ancient records describe her arrival not through the slow, gentle progression of nature, but rather as a sudden, brilliant flash of rational divine light bursting directly from the mind of the sovereign himself. It was a manifestation of pure thought taking physical form. She stepped into the luminous halls of the heavens fully formed, draped in the heavy gleaming armor of intellect, her gray eyes carrying the heavy weight of ancient unfathomable wisdom. From her very first moment, Athena projected an aura of absolute competence, entirely unbothered by the dramatic, swirling tempers that so often governed her divine peers. She viewed the grand theater of existence with a calm, analytical detachment, while others sought to dominate the world through overwhelming displays of raw, elemental power. Athena approached every challenge as if it were an intricate, beautifully designed puzzle. She preferred the silent, deliberate movement of a carefully plotted strategy over the loud, meaningless roar of a reckless confrontation. She was the patron of the artisan, the architect, and the philosopher, offering her quiet, invisible guidance to those who sought to elevate their minds above the turbulent noise of the mortal realm. In matters of conflict, her approach was characterized by an almost chilling sense of control. Athena was a goddess of defensive war, of the tactician's table, and of the carefully drawn map. When she was called upon to guide heroes, she did not offer them sudden surges of impossible strength or bursts of blinding fury. Instead, she offered them clarity. She whispered into their thoughts during the quiet, tense hours just before the dawn, providing them with the exact sequence of steps required to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Her guidance was a cool, refreshing breeze across a fevered brow, settling the anxious heart and sharpening the focus of the mind. She valued efficiency, restraint, and the conservation of energy. To Athena, every movement needed to have a specific, calculated purpose. Even in her patronage of ancient handicrafts, this philosophy remained entirely unbroken. The rhythmic, hypnotic sound of the wooden loom, the meticulous crossing of threads to form a perfect, enduring pattern, this was an extension of her strategic mind. She demanded humility and absolute dedication from those who practiced these arts, ensuring that their works were not just beautiful, but structurally perfect, standing as quiet testaments to the triumph of human patience and divine inspiration. Yet, for all her profound, tireless efforts to instill pure logic and perfectly disciplined order into the fragile, fleeting minds of mortals, there existed a dark, heavy counterweight to her gleaming brilliance. If Athena was the cool, calculating light of reason, her brother Ares was the sudden, oppressive heat of a gathering storm. He was the god of unbridled conflict, the physical manifestation of pure, untamed aggression and the chaotic roar that rises from the depths of human fear. Where Athena represented the careful architecture of civilization, Ares embodied the deep primal instinct that sought to tear it all down. His presence in the ancient world was not marked by careful planning or the quiet murmurs of a council chamber, but rather by the sudden, overwhelming heaviness of the air just before the thunder breaks. To invoke his name was to call upon a force of nature entirely devoid of reason, a chaotic energy that respected no boundaries, recognized no treaties, and completely ignored the delicate balance that his sister worked so tirelessly to maintain. To truly comprehend the nature of Ares, one must not look for him in the clean, well-lit spaces of civilized discourse, but rather in the dark, suffocating moments of absolute panic, when all rational thought simply dissolves into the wind. Imagine the distant rhythmic thud of bronze striking against wood, a sound that grows steadily louder, vibrating through the solid earth and echoing against the walls of a besieged city. Feel the sudden drop in temperature as the sky turns a bruised, unnatural shade of violet, casting long, terrifying shadows across the cracked ground. This is the atmosphere he commanded. Ares did not inspire calculated bravery. He inspired a blind, overwhelming frenzy. He was the heavy, suffocating dust that rises into the sky, obscuring the sun and blinding the senses. He was the absolute confusion that takes hold when order completely collapses, leaving only raw, desperate instinct in its wake. He traveled with constant, unseen companions, the heavy spirits of dread, terror, and sudden alarm, forces that swept across the plains like an invisible, suffocating fog, causing even the most disciplined minds to suddenly fracture under the immense, crushing weight of their own escalating fears. Because of this inherently unstable nature, Ares was a deity who commanded far more fear than actual reverence. While the mortals of the ancient world built magnificent, gleaming temples dedicated to the wisdom of Athena, offering her quiet prayers of gratitude for her steadying hand, they approached Ares with a deep, profound reluctance. They offered him sacrifices not out of love or admiration, but out of a desperate need to appease his volatile temper, hoping that his dark, swirling storm clouds would simply pass over their homes without breaking. He was not celebrated for his tactical brilliance because he possessed none. He operated purely on raw, unfiltered impulse, sweeping into situations with the destructive, unthinking force of a sudden avalanche. Even among his fellow deities, his presence was often met with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. The sovereign of the skies himself viewed this chaotic sun with a weary, profound disappointment, recognizing that Ares represented the very antithesis of the cosmic order he had fought so hard to establish. Yet, despite this overwhelming lack of divine favor, Ares remained an undeniable, unavoidable force. The Greeks understood that logic and reason, no matter how perfectly constructed, could not completely eradicate the primal, shadowed corners of the mortal soul, where fear and instinct forever wait in the absolute dark. Ares was the necessary shadow to Athena's pure, blinding light. He represented the undeniable truth that, underneath the veneer of civilized society, there remained a wild, unpredictable current of raw emotion that could never be fully tamed. His energy was the deafening roar of the storm that tested the strength of the crafted structures of the world. Without the constant looming threat of his unpredictable chaos, the calculated wisdom of his sister would have no real purpose. They were two halves of the human experience, locked in a perpetual, silent struggle for dominance over the fate of the earth. One offered the quiet, reassuring promise of progress and enduring stability, while the other served as a heavy, terrifying reminder of how quickly those carefully laid plans could be swept away by a single, uncontrollable surge of primal instinct, returning everything to the ancient, wordless silence from which it originally emerged. But the mortal world required more than just the strict logic of strategy or the brute force of battle. It was also shaped by the steady heat of the forge and the irresistible pull of desire. But the mortal world required more than just the strict logic of strategy or the brute force of battle. It was also shaped by the steady heat of the forge and the irresistible pull of desire. To understand the delicate architecture of the mortal heart, we must turn our gaze away from the high, sunlit peaks of wisdom and the dark plains of conflict, and look instead toward the vast, shimmering expanse of the ancient sea. It was here, in a time before the grand temples were raised and before the complex laws of civilization were written into stone, that a profound and entirely mystical encounter occurred. The ancient records speak of a silent, breathless moment when the boundless, starry heavens leaned down to touch the restless, swirling foam of the primordial ocean. From this profound cosmic union, rising slowly from the cool, translucent waters, came Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, love, and the irresistible, intoxicating pull of desire. Her arrival was not marked by the loud, sudden clash of thunder or the blinding flash of rational light, but rather by the slow, gentle blooming of the world's first spring. Wherever her bare feet touched the damp earth, fragrant flowers quietly unfolded their petals, and the heavy air of the ancient world was suddenly filled with the sweet scent of myrrh and blooming roses. She was a deity whose very existence challenged the strict logic of the universe. Aphrodite did not carry heavy shields of bronze, nor did she command legions of disciplined soldiers. She possessed a power that was far more subtle, yet infinitely more devastating in its absolute reach. Her domain was the silent magnetic gravity that draws two souls together across vast distances, a force that could effortlessly unravel the most carefully laid plans of kings and emperors with nothing more than a single lingering glance. To stand in her presence was to feel the sharp boundaries of the world suddenly soften and blur. She represented the undeniable truth that even the most stoic minds could be swept away by the sudden tide of deep emotion. While other deities demanded strict obedience and solemn sacrifices, Aphrodite simply required surrender. She was the warm, golden light of the late afternoon, the sudden breathless pause between heartbeats, and the consuming ache of a longing that could never be fully satisfied by the material world. The mythologies describe her influence as a sweeping, irresistible current that carried mortals and gods alike far beyond the safe shores of reason. She was the patron of the quiet vows exchanged in the deepest shadows of the night, and the silent, invisible force that guided the hands of ancient poets as they attempted to capture the fleeting nature of mortal beauty. Yet, this absolute power over the heart was not without its profound consequences. The gravity of her domain often pulled the world into intricate, sweeping dramas that altered the very course of human history. Great cities were built and entire civilizations eventually crumbled to dust, all driven by the intoxicating spell she wove around the minds of men. She was a reminder that love, in its purest and most ancient form, is a force of untamed nature, as beautiful and as perilous as the deep ocean from which she originally emerged. She moved through the celestial halls with an effortless grace, entirely unbound by the heavy duties that tethered the other gods to their thrones. Yet, the universe demands balance. For all the airy lightness of Aphrodite's realm, there existed a necessary, deeply grounding counterweight. The goddess of fleeting beauty was bound by the ancient laws of the cosmos to the god of heavy, enduring substance. We must leave the fragrant gardens of the surface and descend deeply into the warm, subterranean heart of the earth. Here, surrounded by the heavy, comforting scent of melting copper and glowing charcoal, we find the realm of Hephaestus, the god of the steady forge and the master of ancient craftsmanship. To enter his domain is to leave behind the complicated dramas of the heavens and enter a space of absolute, rhythmic focus. Close your eyes and listen to the sounds of his deep, solitary sanctuary. Focus on the low, steady roar of the eternal fire, breathing in and out like the great lungs of the earth itself. The heat here is not the sudden blaze of a forest fire, but a contained, nurturing warmth that radiates slowly outward, seeping deep into the very bones of the world. And above the low hum of the flames, there is a sound, a steady, unhurried rhythm that echoes through the vast caverns. It is the sound of the heavy iron hammer striking the glowing anvil. Strike. A long, echoing pause as the heavy arm lifts. Strike. Another pause, filled only by the soft hiss of hot metal meeting cold water. This relentless, unchanging rhythm is the heartbeat of Hephaestus. He is the ultimate anchor of the divine pantheon, a deity of immense, quiet strength who found his profound solace not in the fleeting affairs of the heart, but in the slow, deliberate act of creation. Unlike the other deities who spent their endless days wandering the skies or demanding the adoration of mortals, Hephaestus was a solitary architect, deeply marked by the immense weight of his craft. He was the silent, steady force that built the gleaming foundations of Olympus. Every golden palace that shimmered in the celestial light, every unbreakable shield carried into battle, every intricate wonder that the gods possessed was born from the quiet, rhythmic labor of his forge. He did not seek the spotlight, nor did he crave the loud praise of the grand halls. He was entirely consumed by the pure focus required to shape raw elements into objects of profound, enduring beauty. while the world above him constantly shifted and changed, driven by the unpredictable winds of emotion. Hephaestus remained perfectly grounded in his eternal comforting routine. The hammer falls. The sparks rise in a slow, mesmerizing dance. The metal bends to his absolute, unwavering will. To focus on the work of Hephaestus is to allow the mind to slowly untether itself from the exhausting anxieties of the waking day. It is an invitation to sink into a state of profound relaxation. Imagine the steady, rhythmic pulse of the forge, aligning perfectly with the slow, deep beating of your own heart. With every strike of the heavy hammer, imagine the tension leaving your muscles, melting away like soft wax near an open flame. The air in his sanctuary is thick, warm, and endlessly comforting, wrapping around you like a heavy blanket that shields you from the chaotic noise of the world outside. The glowing embers cast long, slow-moving shadows across the cavern walls, a gentle, mesmerizing dance that requires absolutely no thought to understand. Hephaestus asks nothing of you, demanding only that you simply rest and allow the rhythmic hum of his eternal labor to carry you into a state of absolute peace. He stands as the ultimate enduring monument to the power of quiet resilience. While the grand tales of the ancient world are often filled with the sudden clash of empires and the overwhelming power of the divine tempers, the true strength of the cosmos lay deeply buried within his silent, glowing forge. He is the heavy, unmoving center around which the rest of the chaotic pantheon inevitably spins. The goddess of beauty may command the sudden arrival of the spring, but it is the god of the forge who carefully builds the unyielding structures that allow the world to endure the harshest winters. They are the essential halves of creation, ethereal inspiration and heavy execution. One provides the reason to build, while the other provides the necessary strength to ensure that the creation stands the test of time. Their eternal dance is a silent reminder that true balance requires both the radiant light of the heavens and the heavy heat of the earth. So the eternal fire continues to roar softly, day after day, year after year, endlessly in the absolute, quiet dark. And from the heavy embers of the forge, we turn to the swift winds that cross the earth, carrying messages, guiding souls, and witnessing the deepest sorrows of the changing seasons. From the heavy, glowing embers of the forge, we turn to the swift winds that cross the earth, carrying messages, guiding souls, and witnessing the deepest sorrows of the changing seasons. To step away from the radiant heat of the anvil is to find oneself standing in the quiet, cooling embrace of the evening. When the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of violet and indigo, the ancient world belonged to Hermes. He was the god of travelers, the celestial messenger, and the gentle wanderer of the twilight. Modern retellings sometimes reduce him to a mere trickster or a frantic courier, racing chaotically across the skies. But to the mortals who actually walked the long, unpaved roads of antiquity, Hermes was a figure of profound, quiet comfort. He was the soft breeze that cooled the brow of a weary traveler, the sudden clearing of the mist that revealed a safe path through the dark woods, and the silent guiding presence at the quiet crossroads of the world. He moved with a quiet, supernatural grace, his beautiful winged sandals making absolutely no sound as they barely brushed the surface of the resting earth. He did not demand grand temples or heavy sacrifices. His altars were simple piles of stones gathered patiently by those who had safely completed their long journeys. He was the patron of boundaries, the deity who stood at the threshold between the known and the unknown, offering a reassuring hand to anyone stepping out into the vast, darkening world. Hermes possessed a unique, entirely unparalleled freedom among the pantheon. He could travel effortlessly between the sunlit peaks of Olympus, the sprawling valleys of the mortal earth, and the deepest, silent shadows of the underworld. This ability granted him his most solemn and beautiful duty. He was the psychopomp, the gentle guide of resting souls. When a mortal's time in the waking world came to its inevitable, peaceful end, it was Hermes who arrived in the quiet dusk. He did not arrive with the terrifying force of a storm or the heavy finality of a judge. He came simply as a quiet companion for the final journey. Imagine the profound relief of seeing his calming silhouette waiting at the edge of the physical world, his golden staff glowing softly in the encroaching dark. He gently offered absolute peace, guiding the weary spirits down the long, quiet, winding path toward the silent kingdom of Hades. Under his gentle guidance, the burdens of mortal life, the pains, the lingering regrets, simply dissolved into the cool evening air. He ensured that no one had to walk into the eternal shadows alone. His presence was a promise that even the most mysterious transitions of existence were handled with an infinite, tender grace. He was the twilight itself, the beautiful fading bridge between the bright demands of the day and the deep, restful quiet of the night. Yet, even the gentle twilight must eventually yield to the profound stillness of the deeper seasons. While Hermes wandered the pathways of the world, offering comfort to travelers and resting souls, there was a force whose quiet sorrow could bring the entire earth to a complete, absolute halt. This was Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and the rich soil. In her natural state, she was the warm, golden abundance of the late summer fields. She was the fragrant scent of ripe wheat swaying gently in the afternoon breeze, and the deep, nourishing strength that allowed ancient civilizations to thrive. Mortal men worshipped her with a profound, grounded reverence, understanding their existence was deeply rooted in her generous hands. She was the great mother of the earth, a deity of immense nurturing power who wove the cycle of life into the very fabric of the soil. But the ancient myths reveal that this boundless generosity was inextricably linked to an equally boundless capacity for sorrow. The story of Demeter is the story of the world's first and most devastating winter. The turning of the world's seasons was not born from a calculated celestial decree, but from a mother's profound grief. Demeter had a daughter, Persephone, who was the very light of her existence, the beautiful blooming embodiment of the spring. When fate, ancient and inescapable, drew Persephone down into the silent, shadow-filled realm of the underworld to sit beside Hades, the heart of the great mother simply broke. The loss was not marked by sudden violent retribution against the heavens, but by a slow, creeping withdrawal of warmth from the world. Demeter pulled her nurturing hands away from the soil. She draped herself in the heavy, dark robes of mourning and began to wander the earth, her eyes focused only on the horizon, searching endlessly for the light that had been taken from her. And as she wept, the entire mortal world quietly wept with her, plunging into a profound, endless sorrow. Imagine the inevitable descent of the cold. It begins with a sudden crispness in the air, a chilling wind that sweeps across the golden fields, turning vibrant leaves to shades of brittle brown and faded gold. The warmth of the sun becomes distant, pale, and weak. The heavy clouds gather, thick and gray, blanketing the sky in an endless, suffocating twilight. Then, the snow begins to fall. It falls in a slow, continuous, hypnotic drift. Millions of delicate, icy crystals drifting silently down through the heavy air, settling over the ancient forests, the quiet villages, and the vast, empty plains. The rivers, once flowing with a lively, rushing energy, slow down, their surfaces freezing into thick, impenetrable sheets of smooth, white ice. The animals retreat into their deep burrows to wait out the dark. The entire earth is slowly covered in a seamless, unbroken blanket of pure, blinding white. Every sharp edge of the world is softened. Every loud, echoing noise is completely muffled by the heavy falling snow. This is the profound, magical lethargy of Demeter's sorrow. To experience the winter is to step into the physical manifestation of a broken heart. The goddess of the harvest allowed the world to starve, not out of malice, but because her grief was simply too immense to leave room for life to grow. The ancient Greeks understood this cold, silent season as a necessary time of universal rest, dictated by divine mourning. The earth was forced to stop its endless producing, its growing, and its constant movement. The fields lay dormant, buried beneath the frost, waiting patiently for the return of the spring. In this absolute stillness, there's a strange, overwhelming peace. The mind slows down, mirroring the frozen landscape. The breathing deepens, matching the slow, nearly imperceptible rhythm of the sleeping seeds buried deep beneath the ice. The winter respectfully demands that we retreat inward, that we carefully find the quiet spaces within ourselves, and that we fully embrace the heavy, comforting blanket of the long night. It is a time for deep, unbroken slumber, wrapped in the silent, protective chill of the natural world. Demeter's grief was so powerful, so absolutely unyielding, that even the sovereign of the skies could not ignore the frozen silence of the earth. The eventual return of Persephone, a delicate compromise forged in the high halls of Olympus, brought the slow, thawing warmth back to the soil, giving birth to the cyclical nature of the year. But the memory of that first devastating cold remains forever etched into the bones of the earth. Every year, when the days grow short and the air turns sharp, the world remembers the goddess who walked the frozen plains in search of her child. The winter returns, spreading its silent, heavy lethargy over the continents, inviting all living things to simply close their eyes, to let go of the exhausting demands of the sun, and to drift completely into the peaceful, restoring embrace of the frost. It is a majestic, beautifully quiet sorrow, a divine pause that ensures the world has the necessary strength to bloom again when the time is finally right. As the earth learned to rest beneath Demeter's heavy frost, the skies and forests above were commanded by a different magic, the wild pulse of nature, the silver glow of the moon, and the blinding brilliance of the sun. As the earth learned to rest beneath Demeter's heavy frost, the skies and forests above were commanded by a different magic, the wild pulse of nature, the silver glow of the moon, and the blinding brilliance of the sun. Deep within the ancient untamed woods, far beyond the stone walls of civilized cities, the air hummed with a different kind of ancient power, a subtle, vibrating energy that seemed to rise directly from the roots of the ancient trees and settle deep within the chest. This was the domain of Dionysus, the deity of the vine, the hypnotic trance, and the profound, untethered liberation of the human mind. To encounter his presence was not to meet a god of calculated reason, but to step into a slow, mesmerizing dream state. Imagine the heavy, sweet scent of crushed grapes, damp earth, and wild ivy clinging to the evening breeze. Listen to the distant, rhythmic beating of wooden drums, a slow, thumping cadence that perfectly matches the deepest pulse of the natural world. Dionysus did not ask mortals to build him rigid architectural marvels. He asked them to let go. He was the heavy, intoxicating warmth that spreads through the limbs after a long day of labor, the loosening of rigid societal bonds, and the sudden, overwhelming desire to simply dissolve into the rhythmic dance of the cosmos. His followers wandered through the twilight forests, moving in a synchronized, trance-like state, their eyes closed, their minds entirely surrendered to the deep, echoing vibrations of the earth. The ancient stories tell of mortals and kings who attempted to resist this natural, wild current, clinging desperately to the rigid illusions of control. But Dionysus did not meet their resistance with physical retaliation. Instead, his retribution was purely psychological, a slow, disorienting unraveling of their reality. Those who mocked his wild nature, who tried to build rigid walls against the creeping vines, found themselves hopelessly lost within their own minds, wandering endlessly through impenetrable psychological forests that offered absolutely no physical escape. They were slowly consumed by the very wilderness they tried to deny, their identities dissolving peacefully but permanently into the vast echoing silence of the natural world, becoming nothing more than whispering vines and forgotten shadows. He was the profound paradox of divine liberation, offering mortals a way to escape the exhausting confines of their own thoughts, inviting them to close their eyes and sink heavily into the ancient collective memory of the wild earth. In this timeless, heavily shadowed space, the exhausting burdens of mortal ambition were completely forgotten, leaving only profound peace. Yet, when the heavy, intoxicating trance of the night slowly lifted, the world was forced to open its eyes to a completely different kind of overwhelming power. Rising above the eastern horizon in a chariot of blinding golden light came Apollo, the god of the sun, of prophecy, and of perfectly tuned music. If Dionysus was the dark, swirling depths of the unconscious mind, Apollo was the absolute, unyielding clarity of the waking day. Feel the immense physical weight of the midsummer sun pressing down upon your shoulders, a heavy, radiating warmth that penetrates through the skin and settles deeply into the bones. Apollo was this radiant, inescapable brilliance. He was the master of the golden lyre, plucking strings that resonated with mathematical perfection, creating a continuous, harmonious hum that held the very fabric of the daylight together. He was a deity of intense, dramatic emotion, a figure whose divine light was so incredibly brilliant, so completely unfettered by the gentle mists of the morning that it often cast the longest, most profoundly sorrowful shadows across the mortal lands. The myths surrounding the sun god are steeped in a heavy, poetic melancholy. His presence was so intense, so entirely overwhelming, that the mortal world often struggled to withstand his radiant embrace. The ancient poets spoke of his deep affections for those who walked the earth, affections that often ended in beautiful, quiet transformations, rather than lasting earthly unions. When the wild nymph Daphne fled from his overwhelming brilliance, seeking the protective quiet of the earth, she was not struck down, but rather granted a profound, eternal stillness. Her physical form slowly merged with the ancient damp soil, her breath becoming the soft rustle of leaves, her arms extending upward to become the heavy, silent branches of the sacred laurel tree, forever resting in the dappled shade. Likewise, his devotion to the young Prince Hyacinthus ended in a gentle, mystical fading. As the golden light of the day shifted and the shadows lengthened, the mortal youth quietly dissolved into the earth, his essence blooming eternally as a delicate, fragrant flower, perfectly preserved in the warm, golden amber of Apollo's eternal memory. The sun god carried these quiet tragedies with him across the sky, his brilliant light forever tinged with the heavy, beautiful sorrow of things that are simply too fragile to endure the full weight of divine love. As Apollo's golden chariot completed its long, exhausting journey across the heavens, sinking slowly beneath the western horizon, the oppressive heat of the day finally began to break. The air cooled, the heavy light faded, and the world was bathed in a completely different, much softer illumination. This was the arrival of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, the deep wilderness, and the pale silver light of the moon. She was the celestial twin to the sun, yet her nature was entirely opposite. Where Apollo was the loud, demanding presence of the day, Artemis was the absolute, unburdened silence of the night. Imagine standing in the center of an ancient, untouched forest. The ground is soft beneath your feet, carpeted in thick, damp moss. The only sound is the gentle, rhythmic sighing of the wind through the high pines. The moonlight filters down through the canopy in thin, silvery beams, turning the world into a quiet, monochromatic painting of perfect, undisturbed peace. There is no urgency here, no ticking of clocks, only the slow, eternal breathing of the ancient earth. This profound, unbreakable stillness was the very essence of the moon goddess. Artemis existed completely outside the exhausting, emotional dramas of the celestial courts. She possessed a cold, crystalline focus, a fierce independence that required no validation from gods or mortals. She wandered the deepest, most isolated corners of the earth, stepping lightly across the fallen leaves, accompanied only by the silent, graceful creatures of the woods who recognized her as their eternal guardian. Her followers were those who sought absolute refuge from the complexities of the world, finding true, lasting comfort in the rhythmic, predictable patterns of the wild. To those who respected the delicate balance of her domain, she was a quiet, unseen protector, a calming presence in the dark. But to those who dared to intrude upon her sacred solitude, carrying the loud, chaotic arrogance of the civilized world into her silent sanctuary, she offered a swift and absolute correction. The ancient whispered tales speak of mortal hunters who stumbled upon her silver light, believing they could conquer the untouchable wild. They did not meet violent ends, but rather, they simply lost their humanity. They were quietly transformed, their forms dissolving into the shapes of the very beasts they once hunted, fading silently away into the deep, impenetrable shadows of the woods, becoming forever a part of the quiet, natural order they had sought to disrupt. Artemis asked nothing of the world, except that it remember the profound value of silence. Her silver light did not demand attention. It merely illuminated the path for those wandering through the dark, offering a cool, refreshing clarity to the weary and exhausted mortal mind. To watch the moon slowly track across the midnight sky, measuring the quiet hours in silver light, is to feel the heavy heartbeat of the mortal world slow down to a deep, endlessly restful rhythm. The slow, wild trance of the heavy vines, the blinding heavy brilliance of the sun, and the quiet silver of the moon all played their necessary parts in the grand spinning dance of the ancient cosmos. Yet, for all their wandering across the heavens and the wild earth, every deity and mortal eventually sought the very same thing, a place of quiet warmth and a gentle place to rest. As the earth learned to rest beneath Demeter's heavy frost, the skies and forests above were commanded by a different magic, the wild pulse of nature, the silver glow of the moon, and the blinding brilliance of the sun. Deep within the ancient untamed woods, where the thick shadow of the canopy entirely obscures the sky, we find the realm of Dionysus. To enter his domain is to slowly surrender the rigid boundaries of the waking mind. He was not a deity of structured temples, straight marble columns, or quiet, orderly prayers. He was the heavy rhythmic beating of a distant drum echoing through the ancient trees, a sound that bypasses logic and speaks directly to the deepest, most ancient parts of the human spirit. He was the god of the vine, of the harvest's intoxicating nectar, and of the profound psychological liberation that occurs when mortals finally let go of their exhausting earthly identities. When his followers gathered under the starlit canopy, they did not engage in chaotic destruction, but rather slipped into a profound, deeply peaceful collective trance. The air around them grew thick with the sweet, heavy scent of crushed grapes, damp soil, and wild ivy. His rituals were an open invitation to dissolve completely into the slow, steady rhythm of the natural world. Those who resisted this ancient call, those stubborn kings who clung too tightly to their rigid laws and refused to acknowledge the wild, undeniable pulse of the earth, found themselves quietly overwhelmed by the mind's own labyrinth. The old myths speak of these unyielding mortals not meeting violent physical ends, but rather experiencing a sudden, mystical dissolution of their waking reality. They were simply swallowed by the vast immensity of the forest, their rigid minds wandering eternally into the deep green shadows, their forms fading entirely into twisting vines and ancient roots. Dionysus offered a beautiful, overwhelming lethargy, a heavy, intoxicating sleep that served as a reminder that underneath the careful, waking architecture of civilization, the mind is a vast, uncharted wilderness waiting to be quietly explored. He was the quiet, intoxicating breath that softly urged the weary traveler to finally lay down their heavy burdens. But the wild, hypnotic trance of the deep, shadowed forest must eventually give way to the overwhelming, radiant heat of the open sky. As the night recedes and the heavy mists of the woodland slowly evaporate, the world is bathed in the heavy golden brilliance of Apollo. He is the god of the sun, of prophecy, of healing, and of the slow, resonant, lingering chords of the lyre. His presence is the unmistakable, suffocating warmth of a late summer afternoon, the kind of heavy golden heat that makes the air shimmer above the ground and gently begs the heavy eyelids to finally close. Apollo moved across the vast heavens in a magnificent chariot of blinding light, casting a radiant golden blanket over the sleeping valleys and the ancient mountains. He was the idealized, perfect vision of celestial beauty, draped eternally in golden light, forever chasing the perfect, harmonious chord that could bring the entire cosmos into absolute balance. To hear the music of Apollo is to feel the slow, steady vibration of a golden string resonating through the hollow chambers of the chest. It is a sound that commands absolute stillness. Yet, beneath his blinding brilliance and his perfect melodies lay a deep, echoing melancholy. For all his prophetic vision and his radiant charm, his encounters with the fragile, fleeting nature of the mortal heart often ended in a quiet, deeply poetic sorrow. The ancient stories tell of his profound, overwhelming infatuations, of mortals who simply could not withstand the intense, all-consuming heat of a sun god's devotion. When his affections were returned, but ultimately doomed by the fragile, brief limits of mortal endurance, the tragedies were never marked by sudden, painful trauma. Instead, under the heavy golden light of his profound sorrow, those he loved simply faded gently away from the physical realm. A beloved companion, caught in a deeply unfortunate twist of fate, did not suffer, but rather dissolved gracefully into the soft, fragrant petals of a blooming hyacinth flower, leaving behind only a delicate scent on the warm breeze. Another, fleeing from his overpowering, radiant intensity, found permanent, peaceful sanctuary by transforming slowly and quietly into a deeply rooted, perfectly still laurel tree. Apollo, forever carrying the immense burden of his overwhelming power, wore the leaves of that tree as a crown, a constant, silent tribute to the delicate, tragic balance between the eternal gods and the easily bruised world of mortals. He was the beautiful, tragic poet of the heavens, his brilliant, blinding light forever accompanied by the long, dark, cooling shadows of regret. As the heavy golden heat of Apollo's sun inevitably sinks below the western horizon, the sky cools, the shadows lengthen, and the world is instantly claimed by the quiet, silver stillness of his twin sister, Artemis. If Apollo was the overwhelming, blinding warmth of the endless day, Artemis was the absolute, focused clarity of the deep night. She was the goddess of the untouched wilderness, the protector of the innocent, and the silent, watchful guardian of the moon. Her domain was the dense, untracked forests, where the green moss grows thick over ancient stones, and the air is always cold, crisp, and entirely still. She did not seek the loud adoration of crowded, bustling cities, nor did she ever desire the complicated, heavy entanglements of romantic devotion. She was a deity of fierce, unyielding independence, moving completely unnoticed through the deep shadows, guided only by the pale, distant, comforting light of the stars. She required no grand monuments, finding true solace in the sprawling expanse of the untamed earth, where the pure, unwritten rules of nature governed absolute peace. To encounter Artemis in the wild forests was to experience the profound, breathtaking awe of nature in its purest, most completely untamed form. She walked with a quiet, deliberate grace, her footsteps making absolutely no sound upon the bed of fallen pine needles. She was accompanied only by the silent, majestic creatures of the woods, who followed her with a deep, instinctual reverence. Her authority was absolute, commanding a profound, completely silent respect from every living thing that crossed her path. Those mortals who foolishly trespassed into her sacred, hidden glades, carrying arrogance or disrespect into the pure, undisturbed silence of her realm, were met with swift, poetic consequence. The old tales do not speak of brutal retribution or visceral fear, but of a quiet, inevitable transformation. A hunter who accidentally gazed upon her pristine sanctuary was not met with violence, but rather felt his own form quietly shifting, his waking mind slipping away into the fog as he became a magnificent, silent stag. He was doomed to wander the cold, misty forests forever, a permanent, wordless, peaceful part of the vast landscape he had so foolishly disturbed, his past life entirely forgotten in the deep green shadows, finding a strange solace in the quiet unknown. Artemis demanded nothing but absolute reverence for the untouched, silent world. Her presence was a cooling silver mist that settled gently over the fevered earth, offering a profound sense of clarity and undisturbed, eternal peace. She was the calm, watchful eye in the dark, ensuring that the wild spaces remained forever wild, and that the quiet innocence of the natural world was eternally protected from the encroaching, exhausting noise of human ambition. Her silver light provides a completely different kind of comfort than the heavy heat of the sun. It is a cool, detached serenity that asks absolutely nothing, demands nothing, and simply exists in perfect, absolute balance with the quiet breathing of the earth. In her presence, the mind settles into a slow, steady rhythm. The heavy, golden warmth of the sun is completely forgotten, replaced by the cool, soothing embrace of the moon. She is the ultimate guardian of the night, asking only for absolute, pure, and unbroken silence. Yet, for all their wandering across the heavens and the wild earth, every deity and mortal eventually sought the very same thing, a place of quiet warmth and a gentle place to rest. Yet, for all their wandering across the heavens and the wild earth, every deity and mortal eventually sought the very same thing, a place of quiet warmth and a gentle place to safely rest. When the long, exhausting journey of the day is finally over, when the weary traveler at last steps out of the biting cold and the thick, enveloping dark of the winding road, they do not seek the overwhelming brilliance of the sun or the vast, unpredictable depths of the ocean. They seek the familiar, comforting embrace of the hearth. Here, at the very center of the home, sits the goddess Hestia. She is the eldest of the ancient Olympians, having been the very first to witness the dawn of the divine age, yet she is, without question, the most profoundly still. While her powerful siblings engaged in endless turbulent struggles for dominion over the skies, the oceans, and the sprawling, chaotic minds of mortals, Hestia simply chose absolute peace. She possessed no desire for grand, echoing temples built upon high, wind-swept cliffs, nor did she wish to command the loud, unpredictable forces of the natural world. When offered a majestic, golden throne within the great shimmering halls of the heavens, a seat of immeasurable celestial power, she politely and gracefully declined. She chose, instead, to sit quietly upon a simple wooden stool beside the eternal flame. She understood a fundamental, unshakable truth of the cosmos. There is a profound, undeniable power in absolute stillness, and an immeasurable, enduring value in pure simplicity. She is the patron of the quiet sanctuary, the gentle, invisible presence that transforms a mere structure of cold stone and heavy timber into a warm, deeply safe haven against the uncertainties of the long night. She was the quiet, invisible heartbeat of civilization, ensuring that every family, every wanderer, and every isolated village had a source of profound, enduring warmth. She never demanded the chaotic sacrifices of her peers. To truly understand the absolute serenity of Hestia, one must simply close their eyes and listen to the eternal rhythm of the fire. Imagine sitting deep within a comfortable, heavy chair, wrapped securely in a thick woven blanket of soft wool. The room around you is entirely dark, save for the soft, flickering orange light gently spilling from the stone hearth. Listen closely to the slow, steady crackle of the dry, aged wood as the flames gently and methodically consume it. It is a rhythmic, entirely hypnotic sound, a soft pop of expanding air, followed immediately by the low, continuous hiss of the escaping heat. The air within this room is thick and profoundly warm, carrying the deep, earthy, and comforting scent of wood smoke, intertwined with the faint fragrance of dried herbs hanging quietly from the heavy wooden rafters above. Outside the thick walls of this sanctuary, you can hear the faint, muffled sound of a cold, restless wind brushing against the heavy wooden doors and rattling the window panes, but inside, you are completely untouched. You are entirely safe. This deep, consuming sense of absolute security is the very essence of Hestia. She requires no grand offerings, no complex rituals, and no loud hymns of praise. She asks only that you feed the fire, sit quietly in its radiant warmth, and allow the heavy exhaustion of the waking world to slowly melt away from your tired muscles. Her calming presence naturally lowers the shoulders, unclenches the jaw, and gently coaxes the heavy eyelids to finally surrender to the gentle, irresistible pull of sleep. She was the quiet, unseen anchor of every ancient home, ensuring that no matter how chaotic or loud the world became outside the threshold, there was always a place of perfect, undisturbed peace waiting for those who simply needed to rest. The ancient architects understood this, building their greatest cities not just around grand marble plazas, but around the simple, heavy stones of the central hearth. Every meal in the ancient world began and ended with a quiet, respectful thought directed toward her warm light, a deeply grateful acknowledgement of the unassuming deity who held the center of the world together through the sheer, unyielding force of her own tranquility. She is the heavy, comforting blanket draped over the shoulders of the cosmos, the patron of the quiet night inn. While Hestia carefully guarded the steady, warm light of the mortal home, maintaining the quiet peace of the living, another goddess held dominion over the ultimate inevitable peace that waits patiently at the very end of every long journey. This is Persephone, a deity of profound, beautiful duality, the living embodiment of both the fragile, blooming spring and the vast, silent patience of the underworld. Her ancient story is often tragically misunderstood by the fleeting, anxious minds of mortals as a simple tale of sudden, tragic loss. But the older, deeper mythologies reveal a far more complex cosmic necessity behind her journey. Her descent was not a violent abduction or a cruel theft of innocence, but rather a predestined, deeply melancholic descent into an essential, eternal rest. The delicate turning balance of the universe required a bridge between the vibrant, sunlit world above and the silent, shadow-filled realm below. The cosmos needed a queen who understood both the fleeting joy of the blossom and the enduring silence of the roots. Persephone was the chosen, sacred anchor for this eternal, slow-moving cycle. When she first descended into the cool, quiet earth, leaving the bright, blooming meadows of her mother far behind her, she carried the memory of the light down into the profound, echoing dark. She accepted her solemn fate with a quiet, unmatched dignity, gracefully taking her place beside Hades upon a throne of dark, polished obsidian. She was not a prisoner of the shadows. She quickly and naturally became their beautiful, undisputed sovereign queen. She understood, with a wisdom deeper than the oceans, that life and rest are not opposing, warring forces, but rather two halves of a single, eternal, cosmic breath. Over the slow turning of the countless centuries, Persephone fully embraced her magnificent, heavy duality. She learned to walk through fields of bright, fragrant spring flowers and the pale, silent bones of the ancient earth with an equal, breathtaking grace. For half the year, she rises slowly from the deep shadows, bringing with her the gentle, warming rains and the soft green shoots of the new season, reminding the weary world that life is resilient, persistent, and forever returning. But when the days eventually grow short and the autumn air turns sharp and crisp, she willingly and peacefully steps back down into the quiet dark, bringing a necessary, comforting slumber to the exhausted soil. Her descent is a slow, beautiful procession into the quiet night, an invitation for all living things to finally lay down their burdens in sleep. When she rests beneath the soil, the entire mortal world breathes a deep sigh of relief, wrapped in the protective cocoon of the cold season, patiently waiting for her eventual, glorious return. She is the beautiful keeper of the ultimate quiet, the silent watcher of dreams. The mortals of the ancient world prayed to her not with fear or trembling, but with a deep, solemn, and quiet reverence. They sought her quiet mercy, her profound, intimate understanding of transitions, and her gentle, guiding hand when the time came to finally close their eyes to the waking world. She represents the ultimate peaceful transformation, the quiet, seamless shift from the loud, demanding noise of the day into the absolute, undisturbed silence of eternity. In her quiet realm, there is no pain, no hunger, and no fear. There's only the soft, misty twilight and the gentle, endless fields of pale asphodel flowers swaying in a windless sky. Through her eternal, cyclical journey, she patiently weaves the bright heavens, the heavy earth, and the silent underworld into one continuous, harmonious tapestry of life and rest. Her presence assures every wandering soul that the dark is not something to be feared, but a gentle, welcoming space designed for profound restoration. This delicate balance between the sunlit world and the quiet shadows set the stage for a mortal woman whose beauty was so profound, it threatened to pull the very heavens down to the earth. This delicate balance between the sunlit world and the quiet shadows set the stage for a mortal woman whose beauty was so profound, it threatened to pull the very heavens down to the earth. Her name was Psyche. Long before she could truly understand the heavy burden of her own reflection, the mortal world had already begun to worship her. She possessed a grace that did not belong to the fleeting, fragile realm of men. Her beauty was absolute, unblemished, and entirely overwhelming. It was not a loud, demanding presence, but a soft, luminous perfection that drew the eyes and quieted the breath of anyone who crossed her path. Travelers from distant lands would alter their long routes simply to catch a fleeting glimpse of her, walking quietly through the shaded gardens of her father's palace. In their profound, silent awe, mortals began to deeply neglect the ancient sacred altars of the high Olympians. The heavy marble temples dedicated specifically to Aphrodite, the eternal goddess of love and celestial beauty, grew incredibly cold and undeniably silent. The fragrant incense ceased to burn in the copper braziers, and the garlands of fresh, vibrant flowers slowly withered upon the forgotten dusty statues. To the powerful goddess looking down from the sunlit, distant peaks, Psyche was not merely a beautiful, innocent mortal child. She was a disruption of the ancient cosmic order, a living insult carved directly into fragile mortal flesh. Yet, for all the profound reverence laid gently at her bare feet, Psyche lived in an ocean of absolute, suffocating isolation. She was adored from a distance as if she were a painted masterpiece or a tall statue of smooth white marble. But she was never truly touched. Her two older mortal sisters had married noble lords and departed for warm, grounded lives, while Psyche remained entirely alone, wandering the long, echoing, empty stone corridors of her childhood home. Men gazed upon her with deep, fearful reverence, believing her to be an untouchable manifestation of the divine, a spirit too pure for the heavy soil of the earth. She knew only the heavy, invisible, and incredibly lonely barrier that her own physical perfection had built securely around her. High above, Aphrodite watched this silent, unauthorized worship with a growing, cold, and calculated divine resentment. She summoned her son, Eros, the ancient and overwhelmingly powerful architect of pure desire. His domain was the sudden, magnetic pull between wandering souls, a primal force that respected no logic and bowed to no earthly king. The goddess commanded him to descend into the quiet mortal realm and bind this disruptive girl to a miserable, ruinous, and deeply unhappy fate. Eros, carrying the heavy, unavoidable weight of his mother's anger, descended silently under the protective cover of a moonless night, passing completely unnoticed through the heavy stone walls to find the sleeping princess. But as he stood silently over her quiet, gently resting form, the ancient magic of the cosmos fundamentally shifted. The dim light of a single bronze oil lamp cast a soft golden glow across her relaxed features, revealing a profound peace that momentarily stopped the breath of the god himself. Eros, the eternal, unchallenged master of the heart, found his own ancient rhythm faltering in the stillness of the dark room. He could not execute the cruel, vindictive command. Instead, a deep, overwhelmingly protective instinct settled heavily over him, permanently altering the entire complicated trajectory of their interconnected fates. Yet, the absolute anger of Olympus could not be entirely ignored, and the mortal world still required an undeniable answer for the neglected, silent temples. Soon, a heavy, deeply melancholic prophecy was delivered from the shadowed oracle to Psyche's grieving, desperate father. The unyielding decree demanded that the beautiful girl be taken immediately to the highest, most desolate, and completely isolated peak of a distant, rocky mountain. She was to be dressed not in the bright, joyous, woven garments of a traditional bride, but in the dark, heavy, absorbing fabrics of profound mourning. She was to be left completely alone, surrendered entirely to a mysterious, unseen, and terrifying fate that the high heavens had permanently decreed. The long procession up the steep mountain was slow, heavily measured, and weighed down by absolute, silent, crushing sorrow. With every upward step, the comforting sounds of the waking world faded further into the distance, replaced only by the cold wind whistling mournfully through the jagged rocks. They left her standing perfectly still at the very edge of the known world, a solitary, trembling figure wrapped in shadows, waiting patiently for a final end she could not possibly comprehend. Standing entirely alone on the high, wind-swept and completely barren peak, Psyche simply closed her eyes and let her heavy, exhausted shoulders fall. She did not weep, nor did she cry out into the vast, empty expanse. She merely waited for the cold, unfeeling stone to claim her fragile life. But the air around her began to change in a way she could have never anticipated. The biting, bitter, freezing wind of the high mountain slowly, imperceptibly softened, warming gently into a fragrant, soothing, and incredibly delicate breeze. This was the invisible, carrying wind of the west, sent specifically by a god who had quietly chosen to hide her from the vast, observing wrath of the upper heavens. The breeze wrapped completely around her like a warm, protective, and deeply comforting embrace, gently lifting her tired, heavy body from the hard, unforgiving, ancient rock. She felt weightless, drifting downwards through the evening air like a single leaf falling slowly from a high branch in the quiet depths of autumn. The descent was incredibly slow, a peaceful, deeply hypnotic, and continuous drifting that successfully lulled her anxious, racing mind into a state of deep, undisturbed, and profound calm. She drifted silently down into a deep, hidden, and incredibly lush valley, a secret, magical place entirely concealed from the watchful eyes of the gods and the exhausting, relentless noise of mortal men. When her bare feet finally, softly touched the perfectly manicured ground, she found herself standing in the center of an unseen, magnificent sanctuary. The air here was perfectly still, incredibly heavy with the intoxicating, sweet, and sleep-inducing scent of blooming night jasmine, warm lavender, and damp, rich, fertile soil. Though her eyes could see absolutely nothing in the thick, comforting darkness, her other senses were gently and methodically awakened. Soft, entirely invisible hands brushed lightly against her tired shoulders, carefully removing the heavy, burdensome garments of her mountain exile. She felt the soothing, heavy warmth of heated, perfumed water washing gently over her skin, a rhythmic cleansing that washed away the deep exhaustion of her journey. Invisible attendants wrapped her securely in the rustling, nearly soundless embrace of heavy, perfectly spun silk. The luxurious fabric moved with a fluid, liquid grace, creating a faint, hypnotic shushing sound as she was guided through long, echoing halls where the polished marble felt pleasantly cool beneath her bare feet. The entire palace was a divine masterpiece of absolute sensory rest, completely devoid of bright lights or sudden, harsh noises. She was led gracefully to an expansive chamber where a massive bed of pure, soft velvet waited patiently in the absolute dark. The deep pillows yielded perfectly to the heavy weight of her resting head, and the thick blankets settled over her like a heavy, impenetrable shield against the vast universe. As she lay resting in this perfect, undisturbed silence, the heavy air of the chamber shifted ever so slightly. She did not see him enter, for he wore the darkness like a cloak, ensuring his divine identity remained concealed. There was only the faint sound of a deep, even breath beside her, and the gentle pressure of a hand finding hers in the dark. When he spoke, his voice was a low, resonant murmur that seemed to vibrate directly within the quiet chambers of her own chest, offering words of profound, unconditional comfort. This was a love without sight, an intimacy entirely without form, built upon the soft brush of his unseen fingers. Sheltered in this velvet darkness, Psyche found a peace she had never known. But the human heart is a fragile vessel, and it takes only a single whisper to shatter the heaviest of silences. Sheltered in this velvet darkness, Psyche found a peace she had never known. But the human heart is a fragile vessel, and it takes only a single whisper to shatter the heaviest of silences. For a long, tranquil period, time within the unseen palace simply ceased to matter. The days passed in a slow, dreamlike procession of unseen luxuries, accompanied by the gentle, cooling breezes that swept silently through the grand, echoing halls. Every night brought the return of her hidden companion, his deep, resonant voice wrapping around her like a protective, impenetrable cloak, banishing all earthly anxieties and offering absolute, unwavering devotion. She had everything the mortal realm could possibly offer, yet she lived within a beautiful, constructed void, completely separated from the complex, noisy reality she had once known. This absolute isolation, initially a profound relief from the heavy burden of her past, slowly began to foster a faint, lingering ache of homesickness. The human mind, even when resting deeply in paradise, occasionally yearns for the familiar, grounded connections of its origins. Responding to the quiet, spoken sorrow of his beloved, Eros reluctantly agreed to let the gentle western winds carry her two older sisters down into the hidden blooming valley, allowing a brief, delicate connection to her former life. He offered only one deeply serious warning, delivered with a heavy, melancholic tone that resonated in the dark. He urged her to completely ignore whatever doubts they might attempt to plant, for their understanding was hopelessly bound to the visible, flawed world. When the sisters arrived upon the soft, perfectly manicured grass of the sanctuary, their initial profound relief quickly curdled into a dark, suffocating envy. They gazed upon the unimaginable wealth, the unseen, perfectly attentive servants, and the absolute, radiant peace that emanated directly from Psyche's rested form. They themselves lived within the complicated, exhausting realities of mortal marriages, bound to aging kings and crumbling stone fortresses, while their youngest sister existed completely untouched by time, resting comfortably in a realm of pure, divine luxury. This stark contrast ignited a slow, creeping bitterness within them. Beneath their wide smiles and their enthusiastic, clinging embraces lay a sharp, deliberate intent to fracture the perfect, unblemished serenity they had discovered. They began their work slowly, using the subtle, insidious tone of deep familial concern. They asked careful, probing questions about the true nature of her unseen husband, highlighting the strange, unnatural condition of a love that strictly demanded absolute, permanent blindness. They painted vivid, terrifying pictures of a hidden reality, suggesting that the gentle, resonant voice in the dark belonged not to a kind deity, but to a monstrous, ancient beast slowly waiting to consume her completely when her guard finally dropped. They twisted the beautiful, comforting mystery of the palace into a dark, suffocating trap, carefully planting the heavy, destructive seed of doubt deeply within the fertile soil of her previously undisturbed, trusting mind. The quiet, insidious whispers of her sisters lingered long after the western winds had safely carried them back to the noisy mortal world. The seed of doubt, once firmly planted, grew rapidly in the fertile darkness of the unseen palace. That night, as she lay entirely still beside her sleeping companion, listening closely to the deep, steady, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, the perfect, heavy silence of the chamber no longer offered her absolute peace. The darkness, which had previously felt like a soft, incredibly protective blanket, now felt dense, oppressive, and heavy with unspoken secrets. The sisters' terrifying words echoed loudly and continuously through the quiet corridors of her mind, a relentless waking nightmare that stubbornly refused to let her slip peacefully into sleep. She tried desperately to focus entirely on the familiar, comforting warmth radiating from his unseen form, and the gentle, reassuring pressure of his resting arm draped heavily across her waist, but the overwhelming human need for absolute, undeniable certainty finally completely overpowered her previous, unwavering trust. With incredibly slow, deliberate, and trembling movements, she carefully untangled herself from his gentle embrace. Her bare feet touched the cool marble floor, making absolutely no sound as she crossed the quiet room. She retrieved a small bronze oil lamp from an unseen table, striking a quiet spark and watching the tiny flame flicker to life, casting long, swaying shadows against the invisible ancient walls. With her heart pounding a frantic, heavy rhythm against her chest, she slowly approached the immense velvet bed. She held the small, flickering light out before her, mentally preparing herself to face the terrifying, monstrous beast her sisters had so vividly described. But as the soft, golden light finally illuminated his resting face, the heavy, suffocating fear instantly dissolved, completely replaced by a profound, overwhelming awe that stopped her breath. There lay no beast, no ancient horror of the deep earth, but the breathtaking, radiant form of Eros himself. His features were perfect, serene, and incredibly peaceful in sleep, framed gently by the heavy folded wings of pure, soft light that rested quietly upon his broad back. This was the ancient god of desire, the very architect of love, who had chosen to quietly hide himself away, simply to protect her from the vast, complicated wrath of the upper heavens. In that moment of profound, staggering revelation, she understood the immense depth of his quiet sacrifice and the sheer magnitude of her own tragic, human folly. She had allowed the cold, cynical fears of the mortal world to shatter the perfect, trusting intimacy of the divine. She stood completely frozen, captivated entirely by the absolute beauty of the sleeping God, overwhelmed completely by a deep, silent, and crushing wave of profound guilt. As she leaned slightly closer, completely lost in the mesmerizing golden light of the moment, the delicate, ancient balance of the magical sanctuary was fundamentally broken. A single drop of warm, luminous oil slipped slowly from the edge of the bronze lamp, falling silently through the still air like a heavy, glowing teardrop. It did not burn his physical form, but it landed gently upon his shoulder like a sudden, blinding flash of painful clarity, instantly breaking the heavy, ancient spell of the unseen sanctuary. The profound pain that woke Eros was not of the flesh, but of the deep, boundless spirit. It was the crushing, overwhelming weight of a trust that had been permanently and completely broken. He opened his ancient eyes, looking deeply into her tear-filled face with a sorrow so immense, so incredibly heavy, that the very foundations of the invisible palace began to quietly tremble. The grand illusion, carefully woven from pure, unadulterated devotion, could simply no longer exist in the harsh, glaring light of mortal doubt. Without a single word of anger, the god of love slowly rose from the velvet bed. His majestic wings unfurled with a soft, rustling sound, like the heavy sigh of a dying wind. His voice, previously a deep, comforting anchor in the dark, now echoed with a profound, echoing finality. He spoke softly, stating simply that love could not possibly reside where absolute trust had been so completely abandoned. He turned away from the flickering light, his beautiful form already beginning to merge completely with the deep surrounding shadows of the room. The departure of Eros was not a sudden, violent exit, but a slow, heartbreaking, and quiet dissolution of the entire magical realm. As he stepped backward into the absolute dark, his radiant glow simply fading away into the night, the magnificent unseen palace began to softly unravel around her. It did not crash to the ground in loud, terrifying ruins. Instead, it dissolved quietly, slowly lifting away like the thick, heavy morning fog gently evaporating beneath the rising, warming sun. The soft, silencing velvet of the bed, the cool, polished marble floors, and the heavy, intoxicating scent of the blooming night jasmine all faded entirely into the wind, leaving absolutely no trace of their previous existence. The profound, magical lethargy that had held the deep valley in perfect, undisturbed peace simply vanished. The quiet, invisible sanctuary was gone, taking with it the perfect, undisturbed peace she had briefly known. Left alone on the barren hillside, the invisible walls of her sanctuary gone forever, Psyche realized that to reclaim her love, she would have to walk through the most unforgiving shadows. Left alone on the barren hillside, the invisible walls of her sanctuary gone forever, Psyche realized that to reclaim her love, she would have to walk through the most unforgiving shadows. She moved with a quiet resilience, her bare feet softly tracing the paths that led directly to the gleaming marble steps of Aphrodite's sunlit temple. She knew the goddess harbored a deep resentment, yet Psyche approached with her head bowed in absolute peaceful submission. Aphrodite, looking down from her high pedestal with eyes as sharp and cold as polished diamonds, did not offer immediate forgiveness or gentle understanding. She offered a series of impossible labors, designed not merely to test the mortal girl's physical limits, but to slowly, methodically weigh her spirit down under the unyielding weight of divine expectations. Yet, Psyche accepted these heavy burdens with a calm, unbroken silence, stepping willingly into a profound trial of patience. The first task was a masterful illusion of simplicity, a monumental labor of pure, exhausting repetition. Aphrodite led Psyche into a shadowy and completely silent storehouse where a mountain of countless seeds, wheat, barley, poppy, and lentils lay mixed together in an overwhelming, chaotic mound. She was ordered to separate every single grain into its proper, meticulously organized pile before the sun slipped below the distant horizon. Psyche knelt softly upon the cold stone floor, plunging her delicate hands into the endless ocean of grain. Listen closely to the soft, rhythmic rustling of the dry seeds sliding gently through her fingertips, a continuous, whispering shush that echoed faintly off the heavy stone walls. Pick, sort, place, pick, sort, place. The work was slow, hypnotic, and utterly mesmerizing in its endless monotony. As the heavy afternoon light stretched into long shadows, the silent earth took pity on her quiet endurance. From the damp crevices of the stone floor emerged a vast, completely silent army of tiny ants. They moved in perfect harmony, a dark, living river that flowed seamlessly through the chaotic mound, carrying each seed to its rightful place. But the heavy trials continued, each demanding a deeper level of serene endurance. Psyche was next sent to a distant riverbank, ordered to gather the gleaming fleece from a herd of magnificent, otherworldly rams. These were not the gentle sheep of mortal pastures, but creatures of immense power, their massive bodies radiating a heat so intense and a light so blinding that to approach them during the high waking hours of the day was to be consumed by their overwhelming presence. Psyche did not rush blindly into the shimmering fields. She sat quietly among the swaying green reeds beside the cool, flowing river, letting the heavy, hypnotic murmur of the rushing water calm her steady breathing. She waited with infinite patience for the bright sun to sink lower into the sky, watching as the fierce light of the magical rams slowly softened into the heavy amber of the approaching dusk. As the creatures finally retreated into the deeply shaded groves to rest, brushing their magnificent coats against the low-hanging branches of the ancient trees, Psyche moved silently through the gathering twilight. She carefully gathered the soft, glowing tufts of fleece that had been gently snagged on the rough tree bark, completing her impossible task without ever disturbing the profound, sleepy quiet of the cooling evening. For her third labor, she was commanded to fill a small crystal vial with the dark waters of a sacred, impossible river. This ancient river flowed high atop a sheer, steep cliff face, its dark, icy waters plunging endlessly into the deep, misty valleys far below. There were no pathways, no carved footholds, only the smooth, unyielding face of the black rock and the cold, swirling gray mist that completely obscured the unreachable summit. Psyche stood quietly at the base of the towering cliff, her small hands holding the fragile glass, accepting the absolute impossibility of her mortal ascent. She simply stood perfectly still, letting the deep, rhythmic roar of the falling water wash completely over her, a heavy, enveloping white noise that successfully drowned out every anxious thought and left her mind empty, deeply grounded, and perfectly at peace. It was in this state of quiet surrender that help arrived from the highest heavens. A massive golden eagle, moving without sound through the thick air, descended gracefully from the heavy clouds. It gently took the delicate vial from her unresisting hands, soaring effortlessly upward through the thick mist, and returned moments later, placing the vessel, now heavy with the dark water, back into her waiting palms. The final task required a journey far beyond the sunlit borders of the mortal world. Aphrodite commanded Psyche to descend into the deep, silent realm of Hades to request a small, sealed box from Persephone, the tranquil queen of the shadows. The descent was a slow, incredibly heavy walk down into the absolute quiet of the earth. The air grew progressively cooler, thicker, and more deeply comforting with every downward step. She passed safely through the misty fields of pale asphodel, guided by the silent, respectful spirits of the ancient world. When she stood before the dark obsidian throne, Persephone handed her the sealed box with a soft gaze, warning her that the contents were not meant for mortal eyes. Psyche began her slow ascent back toward the fading light of the surface. But as she walked, the immense accumulating exhaustion of her impossible trials began to settle heavily over her weary bones. Her limbs felt like they were forged from solid lead. The sealed box in her hands seemed to pulse with a strange, dark gravity. It whispered softly to her exhausted mind, promising an end to the endless walking, an end to the trials, and a profound, permanent rest. Unable to carry the immense weight of her own exhaustion any longer, she slowly sank to the soft ground. With trembling fingers, she broke the ancient seal and opened the lid. There was no brilliant light, no sudden revelation. Instead, a thick, heavy, and incredibly dark mist poured silently from the box, wrapping around her in a suffocating yet profoundly peaceful embrace. It was the pure essence of the underworld slumber. A sleep so deep, so completely devoid of dreams or movement that it mirrored the eternal stillness of the stone itself. Psyche did not fight it. She lay back upon the cool earth, her heavy eyelids closing, her breathing slowing to an almost imperceptible rhythm. She was caught in an eternal pause, completely insulated from the demands of the gods, the pains of love, and the exhausting burdens of the waking world. She was finally, entirely at rest. To watch her sleep was to feel your own body grow incredibly heavy, to feel the deep, undeniable urge to simply close your eyes, let go of the day, and drift down into the comforting, silent dark alongside her. But true love, forged in the quiet resilience of the soul, possesses a magic that can pierce even the deepest slumbers of the earth. Eros, his heart fully healed by the undeniable proof of her immense devotion, descended silently from the heavens. He knelt beside her, motionless form, carefully gathering the heavy dark mist of sleep and gently returning it to the sealed box. With a soft touch to her cheek, he broke the ancient spell. Psyche took a slow, deep breath, her eyes fluttering open to see the radiant glow of her companion, now perfectly visible in the soft light of the fading day. He gently lifted her from the heavy earth, carrying her effortlessly upward, past the highest mountains, ascending directly into the luminous halls of Olympus. There, the sovereign of the skies acknowledged the unyielding strength of this quiet mortal woman. Zeus offered her a golden chalice filled with ambrosia. She breathed in the eternal air of the heavens, her spirit expanding into the boundless immortal light. She is proof that even mortals can love like gods, earning her place in the eternal pantheon not through conquest, but through the quiet endurance of the human spirit. Psyche's soul had found its immortal rest in the luminous halls of the heavens. But across the ancient sea, in a quiet stone temple, another mortal woman's devotion was about to lead her into a far darker history. Psyche's soul had found its immortal rest in the luminous halls of the heavens. But across the ancient sea, in a quiet stone temple, another mortal woman's devotion was about to lead her into a far darker history. Long before her name became a whispered warning in the dark, long before the cold statues froze mid-stride upon forgotten isolated shores, Medusa was simply a mortal girl. She was not born of chaos or monstrous origins, but was instead a figure of profound, quiet grace. Her beauty was not the loud, demanding radiance of the sun, nor the intoxicating allure that sparked great wars. It was a still, undisturbed beauty, like the smooth surface of a deep, forgotten lake, perfectly reflecting the silver light of the moon. She sought no power, no earthly crown, and no grand admiration from the restless, wandering eyes of mortal men. Instead, she sought absolute, unbroken peace. She found her sanctuary within the towering white marble columns of Athena's temple, dedicating her entire life to the strict calming disciplines of the goddess of wisdom. Imagine the deep, resonant silence of the ancient sanctuary in the hours just before the dawn. The heavy, polished stone floors remain perfectly cool to the touch, grounding the mortal spirit in a profound and entirely unshakable peace that seemed to stretch endlessly into absolute eternity. The still air is thick and incredibly sweet with the lingering, heavy scent of burning myrrh, rich cedar, and completely dried, sacred olive leaves. Medusa moved through this massive, quiet space with a slow, deliberate reverence. She was the gentle caretaker of the eternal flame, the silent custodian of the sacred quiet. Her days were measured not by the chaotic events of the outside world, but by the slow, hypnotic sweeping of the marble, the rhythmic pouring of fresh, clear water into bronze basins, and the low, murmuring hum of solitary, deeply focused prayer. She believed entirely in the absolute protection of the goddess she served, trusting that the thick, heavy walls of the temple would forever keep the unpredictable, turbulent storms of the cosmos safely at bay. She was a living extension of the temple itself, pure, quiet, and entirely removed from the exhausting currents of worldly desire. But the ancient, untamed forces of the world are rarely deterred by walls of sculpted stone. The testimonies of the old world suggest that a profound elemental shift began to slowly gather far out over the deep waters. The Lord of the Sea, an entity of immense unpredictable gravity, sensed the perfect undisturbed stillness radiating from the distant cliffside sanctuary. He was drawn to the temple not out of malice, but by the sheer undeniable contrast between her perfect, quiet devotion and the restless, churning chaos of his own watery domain. The arrival of this ancient, overwhelming force was not marked by a gentle approach, but by a sudden, drastic drop in the atmospheric pressure. The sky above the temple bruised into a heavy, dark purple. The comforting scent of incense was suddenly overpowered by the sharp, biting smell of cold sea salt and damp, decaying seaweed. A cold, unnerving dampness began to slowly seep up through the very cracks of the marble floor, signaling the terrifying approach of an inescapable tide. The ancient records frame what happened next, not as a physical encounter, but as a catastrophic elemental collision. An overwhelming, dark storm dragged the inescapable, crushing weight of the ocean directly into the sacred halls. The heavy wooden doors of the sanctuary blew open with a deafening, echoing crack, letting in a rushing, blinding fog of sea mist and freezing rain. The fragile, carefully maintained peace of the temple was completely shattered in an instant, drowned out by the deafening roar of the deep. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the sudden tempest consumed the sacred space, leaving Medusa completely engulfed in an isolating, terrifying darkness where her quiet prayers were instantly swallowed by the roaring wind. When the storm finally, slowly receded, dragging its heavy waters back into the dark depths of the sea, it left behind a devastated, unrecognizable silence. The eternal flame had been violently extinguished. The marble floors were slick with freezing, briny water, and Medusa was left entirely alone in the dark, her profound, innocent trust completely washed away by the indifferent, overwhelming force of the ocean. The sanctuary, once a perfect symbol of unclouded logic and absolute purity, had been fundamentally altered. The heavy, damp chill of the ocean floor now clung stubbornly to the white stone pillars, a lingering shadow that simply refused to fade. When Athena eventually descended from the high peaks to return to her ruined temple, her reaction was not one of warm, comforting embrace, nor did she offer the gentle solace that a grieving heart so desperately required. The goddess of strategy, of strict order, and of perfectly unclouded reason looked upon the scattered, waterlogged offerings and the shivering, completely devastated priestess with a cold, terrifyingly calculating detachment. In the rigid, uncompromising logic of the divine courts, the vast, formless ocean could not be easily contained, nor could the sovereign of the deep be brought to simple justice. But the mortal vessel, the quiet girl who had inadvertently drawn the eye of the storm into the sacred space, could be permanently and absolutely altered. Athena's heavy judgment fell entirely upon the victim. She did not raise her voice in anger, nor did she hurl the destructive lightning of her father. She simply, quietly, passed a heavy sentence that would forever isolate the fallen girl from the entire living world. The transformation began as a slow, incredibly heavy numbness creeping through her tired limbs. The soft, golden strands of Medusa's hair, once carefully brushed and bound in quiet devotion, began to slowly twist and thicken. They took on the cold, hissing life of defensive serpents, creating a constant whispering crown of warnings to any who might ever dare to approach her again. Her delicate skin, which had only known the warm glow of the temple flame, grew incredibly cold, taking on the pale, impenetrable, and deeply heavy hue of aged marble. Her entire physical form was being systematically locked away behind a wall of terrifying, monstrous armor. But the most profound, devastating change occurred entirely within her eyes. Once soft, bright, and deeply trusting in the protective power of the heavens, they were transformed into a heavy, unbreakable curse. Anyone who looked directly into her deeply sorrowful gaze would be instantly overcome by a crushing, unavoidable physical lethargy. Their limbs would rapidly freeze, their breath would completely stop, and they would be turned instantly and permanently into solid, immovable stone. The ancient storytellers frequently called it a punishment, a cruel mark of shame meant to serve as a warning to the rest of the mortal world. But in truth, if you look closely at the deep isolation it created, it was a dark, tragic, and incredibly heavy form of divine defense. Athena ensured that no force of the heavens or the earth, whether mortal king or wandering deity, would ever be able to approach Medusa again without facing the ultimate, silent consequence. She was granted an absolute, unbreakable isolation, encased entirely within a physical fortress of her own terrifying, newly formed visage. By turning every approaching gaze into an eternity of silent rock, the goddess guaranteed that the priestess would never again experience the overwhelming, destructive intrusion of the outside world. Yet, this divine protection was built entirely upon a foundation of profound, inescapable loneliness. Medusa could never again seek the simple, grounded comfort of another living soul. She could never return to the warm, familiar villages of her youth, nor could she ever again sit quietly beside a shared hearth. The heavy doors of the temple, the only true home she'd ever known, were permanently closed to her. She was forced to leave behind the sweet scent of the burning myrrh and the soothing, rhythmic chants of the morning rituals. The beautiful world she once loved and tenderly cared for had systematically turned its back on her quiet existence. Stripped of her sacred life and cast out from the marble columns, the fallen priestess walked away into the desolate wilderness, where silence would soon become her only companion. Stripped of her sacred life and cast out from the marble columns, the fallen priestess walked away into the desolate wilderness, where silence would soon become her only companion. Her long, solitary journey led her far beyond the bustling, sun-drenched cities, far beyond the deeply rutted, dusty roads of wandering travelers, until she eventually arrived at the very edge of the ancient world. Here, on a remote, jagged island completely shrouded in heavy, perpetual sea mist, Medusa finally stopped walking. She found a vast, echoing cavern tucked deep within the gray cliffs, a massive stone sanctuary where the only sound was the slow, rhythmic dripping of condensation from the high, vaulted ceiling and the distant, muffled crash of the cold waves breaking against the lower rocks. She did not build a fire, nor did she attempt to carve a semblance of a mortal life from the harsh environment. She simply existed, day after endless day, wrapped entirely in the profound, heavy quiet of her own isolation. Over the slow turning of countless decades, her name on the mainland was twisted by mortal fears and embellished by wandering storytellers. The quiet priestess was forgotten, replaced in the minds of men by the terrifying legend of the Gorgon. Many wandering heroes, driven entirely by the exhausting, restless demands of mortal vanity and the hollow promise of eternal glory, sought out her hidden sanctuary. They came armed with heavy bronze shields and shining swords, their loud, echoing voices shattering the perfect, damp silence of the island. But none of them were ever prepared for the profound, overwhelming lethargy that accompanied her gaze. They did not meet a raging, violent beast, but rather encountered an overwhelming, crushing wave of ancient sorrow. As their eyes met hers, the loud, chaotic clamor of their ambitions simply ceased. Their heavy limbs grew instantly cold, their frantic heartbeats slowed to an absolute halt, and their forms were permanently frozen into solid gray rock. Over time, the vast cavern slowly transformed into a magnificent, hauntingly beautiful garden of resting statues. Hundreds of figures, caught forever in poses of sudden, profound realization, stood silently in the mist. They became permanent, unmoving monuments to the deep, tragic quiet of Medusa's exile. She wandered slowly among them, a solitary gardener tending to an eternal, completely silent harvest, finding a strange, melancholic comfort in the absolute stillness that now surrounded her completely. It was into this majestic, deeply quiet garden that Perseus eventually arrived. He did not come driven by his own personal malice, but as an instrument of a much larger, incredibly complex celestial design, heavily guided by the unseen hands of the high Olympians. The gods had provided him with a highly polished, incredibly reflective bronze shield, instructing him to approach the sanctuary using only the cool, detached reflections of the metal, avoiding entirely the direct heavy weight of her gaze. His arrival on the misty island was not marked by a loud, echoing clash of arms, but by a slow, incredibly careful creeping through the thick gray fog. As he navigated silently through the sprawling forest of stone figures, the heavy, damp air of the cavern seemed to press down upon him, urging him to simply stop, to lay down his divine weapons, and to rest quietly among the silent statues. But the complex web of fate, woven long before his birth, propelled him steadily forward until he finally reached the deepest, darkest chamber of the sanctuary. Here, completely bathed in the soft ethereal light filtering dimly through the heavy fog, he found her resting. Medusa was not waiting for battle. She was deep in a profound, heavy slumber. Her breathing was slow and incredibly even, echoing softly against the damp stone walls. The terrifying serpents that formed her crown were completely still, coiled peacefully against the cold floor. In the distorted reflection of his polished shield, Perseus did not see a horrifying monster, but rather the serene, incredibly tired face of a woman who had carried the heavy, tragic burdens of the divine world for far too long. She looked as though she had been waiting patiently for centuries for someone to simply allow her to finally, fully rest. The ancient texts often describe the next moment with the chaotic, loud vocabulary of violence and heroic conquest, framing the act as a grand, necessary triumph of good over a terrible evil. But if you look past the loud, echoing boasts of the later storytellers, the true nature of her departure was something far more quiet and deeply merciful. The act was not a sudden, brutal severing, but rather the silent final breaking of her incredibly heavy, earthly anchor. Perseus did not wake her from her deep slumber. He simply facilitated a completely seamless transition from her exhausted mortal sleep into the vast, undisturbed silence of eternity. With a single, fluid, and incredibly swift motion, carefully guided entirely by the unseen hands of the goddess Athena, he separated her heavy, burdened spirit from the cold, stone reality of the cavern. There was no pain, no sudden cry of anguish, only a soft, rushing sound, like the sudden release of a long-held breath. The heavy, oppressive curse that had isolated her from the world for centuries was instantly lifted. Her profound sorrow, the ancient betrayal, and the deep, crushing loneliness of the misty island all simply evaporated into the thick air, leaving behind only the absolute, undeniable peace of the long night. Perseus carefully gathered the remaining essence of her power, placing it securely within a divine darkened satchel, and departed the cavern as silently as he had arrived. He left behind a completely silent, empty sanctuary, the garden of statues finally left to rest completely undisturbed in the eternal, heavy dark. The story of her life, a long, exhausting journey marked by profound devotion, terrible betrayal, and complete isolation, was finally over. She had at last found the absolute sanctuary that the world had so cruelly denied her. Yet, while her weary spirit finally found its deep, eternal rest, the incredible power of her gaze remained completely repurposed by the complex, shifting demands of the celestial order. The remaining essence of Medusa was brought back to the sunlit world and affixed firmly to the center of Athena's grand, unbreakable shield, the Aegis. It was a deeply paradoxical, completely circular fate. The face of the woman who had sought only absolute peace in her quiet temple, and who had been cast out by the very goddess she served, was now the central, terrifying symbol of divine defensive power. Wherever the goddess of wisdom marched, the heavy, paralyzing gaze of Medusa went with her, instantly freezing any chaotic threats into solid, silent stone. The ancient Greeks believed that this image, terrible and tragic, offered a profound, absolute protection against the unpredictable, violent forces of the world. Her face was eventually carved into the heavy stone walls of high temples, stamped onto countless bronze coins, and painted carefully onto the massive shields of mortal soldiers. She became a universal, undeniable talisman, a complex symbol of a power so incredibly deep and so entirely absolute that it simply halted all approaching danger in its tracks. But as the slow, heavy centuries marched steadily forward, and the loud, echoing sounds of ancient battles faded completely into the quiet pages of history, the true, underlying meaning of her gaze slowly began to fundamentally shift. Those who looked closely at the ancient weathered carvings did not just see a terrifying gorgon meant to frighten away evil spirits. They saw the lingering, undeniable memory of the quiet priestess. They saw a profound, incredibly heavy warning about the destructive nature of unchecked divine power, and a silent, enduring testament to the quiet strength required to survive absolute betrayal. Her unblinking stare became a mirror, reflecting back the complex, often tragic nature of existence itself. It asked the observer to simply pause, to completely quiet their own rushing thoughts, and to deeply acknowledge the heavy, unseen burdens that others carry. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound power lies not in loud, violent action, but in the absolute, unyielding stillness of enduring. In the quiet, dusty corners of forgotten museums and the crumbling, moss-covered ruins of the ancient world, her face still watches, waiting patiently in the absolute quiet. The sprawling, chaotic pantheon of the ancient Greeks, with all its blinding brilliance, its sudden dark storms, and its quiet, tragic transformations, eventually slowly faded from the active worship of the mortal world. The heavy marble temples slowly crumbled, their grand columns returning to the earth, and the loud, echoing hymns of praise were completely swallowed by the relentless marching passage of time. The sovereign no longer hurls his bright lightning, the god of the sea no longer demands sacrifices on the wet sand, and the silent queen of the shadows is no longer feared in the dark. Yet, the profound, resonant echoes of their ancient existence continue to slowly vibrate through the deep, quiet corners of our own minds. They represent the fundamental, unchanging forces of nature and human emotion, the slow, rhythmic turning of the seasons, the heavy, necessary cycle of wakefulness and rest, and the enduring, undeniable power of absolute stillness. As we reach the very end of this long, winding journey through the high heavens, the deep oceans, and the quiet, shadowed valleys of the ancient world, it is time to fully let go of the stories. Let the image of the majestic, sunlit peaks slowly dissolve into a soft, comforting gray mist. Let the heavy, rhythmic crashing of the ocean waves slowly fade into the background, becoming nothing more than a gentle white noise that successfully completely calms the mind. Feel the deep radiating warmth of the eternal fire settling completely into your tired muscles, releasing every last remaining ounce of tension you may still be holding. The grand, exhausting dramas of the day are completely over. The slow, heavy, and incredibly peaceful domain of sleep is now softly calling. There is absolutely no need to hold on to any thoughts, no need to plan for the coming morning. You are entirely safe, surrounded by the deep, heavy, and profound quiet of the long night. Allow your breathing to become incredibly slow, perfectly steady, and deeply rhythmic. Sink completely into the absolute stillness, letting the heavy, comforting blanket of the dark wrap securely around you. And as the embers of these ancient myths finally fade into the quiet dark, let your own mind drift completely, resting in the timeless embrace of the ages until we meet again in the light of dawn.